I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join the webinar today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us and hear what we have to say about digital transformation. We're also interested in understanding what you have to say about digital transformation. So please, at any point during the webinar, feel free to use the Q&A box as part of Zoom at the bottom to ask any questions. We have some time at the end to go through Q&A, but if we can take a question live during the course of the conversation, we're happy to do that too. So please, we would love to engage with you and understand what you want to learn more about. Please do use that Q&A. We'd love to engage you. So with that, I'd love to introduce Emma. Emma, do you want to introduce yourself actually?
Sure. Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ema Roloff, and I'm the co-founder of Roloff Consulting. And we really focus on kind of a different part of digital transformation than we're going to be talking about today. But we focus on companies updating and transforming their sales and marketing process to really take advantage of all of the tools that are at our disposal today. But from a backwards compatible perspective, I don't know if that really fits in this scenario, but going back to look at more of my experience, I lived and breathed large scale transformations for about 10 years, selling software into almost every industry you can imagine, and then moving directly into the insurance industry, which we might talk a little bit about today, but also really looking at trends and ideas that go, in my opinion, across every industry. Even though we all like to think we're like fancy little snowflakes. Yes, there are nuances and there are different names for things, but by and large, what makes a successful transformation looks the same across manufacturing and commercial companies and insurance and healthcare. And so I've had the privilege of being a part of many of those different types of transformations and then spend time, just in my spare time talking all about transformation on LinkedIn and YouTube and TikTok.
Excellent. And we're so happy to have you here today, Emma. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Max Smith. I'm a senior director of product marketing here at iGrafx. So we are a vendor in the space that helps companies on their digital transformation journeys. I won't talk too much about our product specifically. I do have a couple slides later on, but we'll keep it mostly to a conversation for the majority of the webinar. So Emma, you mentioned your experience with digital transformation. You did these large scale projects for 10 years and you've been living and breathing it for a while. Maybe can you just talk a little bit about your experience with those companies and their efforts? What are some of the challenges that you saw them face? Maybe what are some of the things that you saw that made them successful? I guess just give us a thought and then we'll jump in from there.
Yeah, so I'm gonna probably make myself sound fancier than I am, but I am infamous on the internet for making the statement that digital transformation is more about people than it is technology. And that view and perspective is born and bred from the time that I spent working with companies, again, all shapes and sizes and industries, move through transformation. Because truthfully, when you find the right partner and the right software solution, the technology is the really easy part. And it's the people that are sticky and, are different from day to day, sometimes moment to moment, depending on like what scenario is going on in the business. And when we focus too much on the technology, what ends up happening is we distill things down to features and functionality or button clicks, and we lose sight of the fact that like transformation as a whole is meant to support people and process. And the digital part is the tool that comes in to enable people and processes to be more efficient. And I feel like we often lose sight of that part of the equation and then focus on the ones and zeros and the code and the technology and what we can do there, because that's truthfully the easy part. And that doesn't mean that like it's the simple part, we'll say. That doesn't mean it's easy. There's still plenty of nuances there. And so what I started to see pretty early on in my time selling software was that the companies that understood the people side of it and dug into change management and were thoughtful about bringing in partners that could help them look at process would design these solutions that were as future proof as you could get, because obviously things are changing so quickly, you cannot completely future proof things. But they were the ones that would design these processes that were more efficient. They would think through how their people, like both their customers and their partners and their employees, are working in these systems. And then they would go find the right technology or implement the technology in a thoughtful way that supported those people and that process. And then that's where the magic starts to happen. And when you don't do that, is when you start to see things like, I did a webinar years ago with the CEO of a different company, and he said, we like to make dinosaurs run faster. And that analogy sits in my head right now of like, when you don't update your process, you're just making that dinosaur run faster with some different technology. And that might spit up different silos or different like bottlenecks in your process that you're not expecting. You might get to the point where, like, again, you've enabled this process, but you're not changing anything. So you're not actually seeing an ROI because it's just a different software that's driving it. Or you end up in the situation where you don't get user adoption and no one uses the software that you spent all this money on. And sometimes people think that I'm like blowing smoke when I say that like user adoption is like one of the number one reasons that transformations fail. But it is, because if nobody is going to use your technology, guess what? You get none of the ROI, you get none of the efficiencies, you get zero of the value that you've been spending probably a lot of money and a lot of time to try and acquire. So I would say the companies that get it and that do it well typically are focused on that people and process piece first and then bring in the technology. And when you start to flip that is when you start to see all of the challenges that we all know so well.
Love to hear it. And so I think just kind of naturally from that, maybe we'll unpack that piece by piece, look at people, look at process, and then look at technology.
Yeah.
Even if that isn't the most important piece.
It's still
Before
important. It's just not number one.
right. It's not the focus. I will say that that the user adoption point resonates with me a ton. It actually wasn't that long ago that I first heard the word shadow IT for the first time, where if like you implement something new and people don't like it, they're just going to find a way to do it another way anyway. And that's how you end up with these hodgepodges of different departments, just kind of, yeah, random acts of technology, right? Like we're just buying like this
Oh
point
yeah.
solution for this little thing that we're doing. It's not approved. It's not through procurement or IT. And user adoption's big. I mean, Gartner would agree with you. I forget what the exact metric is, but I just saw this in a report recently that employee sentiment towards making these changes is at an all-time low because they've been through so many of these projects that, like, this is the promise, is going to change the world. If we just implement this thing, it's going to change the world. And so it's tough to get that user adoption, right? I think it's massively important, like you said.
Well, and I think that, well, I just want to add one thing. You'll also be surprised how many people will just default to your old systems too and just never change. So like there's the shadow IT side of it, which is definitely true that people will go and sign up for like subscriptions of SaaS platforms and find like the path of least resistance that way and find something that they can like use under the under the covers. On the flip side though, like if you have like an old legacy system and you bring in something new and you've got 25 years worth of data in that old system, and you can't possibly move that over at the same time that you're implementing something new. So your legacy technology is still sitting there before the conversion. Guess what? If you haven't done a good job of like putting a why in front of people and making them actually start to like move towards this new solution and made the process better so that their job is at least simplified in some capacity, they're going to take the path of least resistance, which is not learning something new. They're going to stay in their spreadsheets. They're going to keep using your old legacy system. They're going to find all sorts of workarounds that are manual, and they'll have stuff saved on their desktop. And I know people like don't like to, it's not that people don't like to change. They don't like to feel like they are being changed for no reason. And if you can like help them feel a part of that change, they're more likely to move in that direction. But so it's either shadow IT or just like path of least resistance and staying with what they know will be the default for people if you don't take the time to manage the change the right way.
Absolutely. So, do you think there's anything that's driving digital transformation initiatives like today? Has this just been like a steady cadence of people engaging in these digital transformation projects, or is there like kind of ebbs and flows? I mean, one thing that comes to mind for me is like AI, and we will talk about that at some point today. We can't not because it's so topical, but is there anything that's making this imperative now in your mind, or more so imperative than it has been previously?
So when I look at transformation, I think of kind of like there being a couple of different waves. And so there was like the first, like, and this is again kind of goes back to what your definition of digital transformation is. And I could go on a whole rant about why I don't like that term specifically, but of course I use it. But when we look at transformation, the first wave was like in the late 80s, early 90s. And if you look at like an industry like insurance, for example, insurance went through this like wave of digitizing everything. And they actually were kind of, I always tell them, like, they always complain about being like slow to innovate. They were like the OG innovators. They were the ones that figured out how to bring stuff online or like onto computers, how to build out these like super complex, multifaceted policy and claims administration platforms. And they built out these massive IT teams to support these platforms that were all built on like typically COBOL. They had like these everybody went out and they thought that technology was going to be their unique differentiator. And that was the driving force for moving from paper to technology and building out all of these platforms. And many of those solutions are still being used today in some capacity. So these things that were built literally before I was born, or, you know, when I was like this little tiny baby, are still what's driving massive parts of finance, whether that's banking and insurance. They're still being used all over the place in manufacturing, you know, name the industry. There is probably a dark corner somewhere where some legacy platform that was built during this point where they thought technology was going to be their differentiator. So that was like phase one. And then phase two, which is probably about the time, Max, that you and I started our careers, was like when people started realizing like, oh, there's like this whole opportunity to buy software as opposed to building it. And what happens if instead of having these massive IT teams that are building software, we start to partner with these platforms or these software companies and bring them in? And so then there was like this weird like buy versus build like question where there were still people that were trying to build their own technology and still people that wanted to be software companies as their differentiator. And then there were these people that started to realize, like, look at the agility that we get when we start to partner with other companies. Look at what we're able to do instead of focusing on building this. And we can be the expert in what we do, when we can be the insurance expert, when we can be whoever that is. Look at what we're able to accomplish by buying technology. And so there was this shift where some of those old school platforms started to be replaced, but they were still replaced with technology that was really similar to what was built by their internal teams. And so now we've reached kind of this third phase in my mind where anybody that's been limping along on these old software platforms are starting to realize like this is a huge risk. Like we cannot do this anymore. And then the people that made the move in that second phase to something that they went and bought, all of those software companies are now spinning things up and putting them into the cloud. They're all updating their infrastructure because they don't want to go the way of these legacy technologies. And so they're pushing people to move. So there's like the people that still have that foot back in that first phase and the people in the second phase that are being forced to kind of like push forward to whatever this new horizon of cloud enabled SaaS solutions, you know, all of the acronyms that we could throw out. And this phase to me, you know, like there's the cautionary tale of like, Southwest, for example, when their legacy platform went down. Legacy tech isn't going to go down when it's convenient for you. It's not going to go down the day after you switch to your new platform and like all you have to worry about is converting your data. It's going to go down when it's stressed, when you're at highest volumes, when it's most visible to your customers. And I think like situations like that were a wake-up call for a lot of companies of like, what happens if the two guys that we have that know how to code and cobalt get hit by a bus because they're going out to lunch together? Like, what do we do? How do we manage this? So that's like the one push. And then also just kind of being forced with their hand from all of the software companies saying it's time to move, it's time to change, it's time to update.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, okay, so maybe let's jump back then, and let's break down these three pillars: people, process, and technology, right? And
Yeah.
let's start with the people. Um, so when you've seen and again, I guess every question I'll ask can be like, what are some of the cautionary tales and what are some of the carrots, right? Carrots and sticks for movement.
Mhm.
With the people that actually effectuate this change. I mean, I guess there's two types of people really. There's the people effectuating the change. So is there some sort of mandate? Is there something coming from the top that is saying we need to make a change that's sponsoring these initiatives? There, maybe it's even three actually. There's the groups of people that are actually strategically planning that and then kind of executing the change. And then there's the recipients, those users that you were talking about that actually need to receive this change and have it be meaningful for their day to day in order to actually see success at the end of the day. Um, so maybe in from your experience, like how do you see these different groups interacting? Like what are some of the paradigms and archetypes that like have been effective and maybe some that weren't so effective?
So, kind of going back to the idea that people don't like to feel like they're being changed. Um, More often than not, what I see happening is something like one of those catalysts that we were just talking about of like, okay, we know we have to get off of our old legacy platform. We need to move. It's a huge business risk for us. So we're going to go through a digital transformation and we're going to make the directive from the top that we're transforming and we're going to tell people to go figure it out. And then what happens is that like the why behind that, if it's strictly from a business risk perspective, and that's all you're focused on is the catalyst that's pushing you to change, you lose sight of being able to give anybody else down that value chain that's going to be impacted by that change some sort of like, what's in it for me? And, everybody always knows like ever the acronym WIFM. There's so much truth in having a why and a what's in it for me for everybody. And the why that's set at the top has to be specific enough and attractive enough for everybody along that value chain to attach to in some capacity. So maybe from a business perspective, the ultimate driver is the business risk. We know we cannot do this. We cannot afford to have our main source of truth go down. So we know we need to start planning for something different. But while you're doing that, what are the benefits that are how is this going to help management that's going to be leading the charge and selecting the tools? Well, maybe they're going to get better data because right now in that legacy system, they don't have the data that they need. So they're going to have better data to be able to drive decisions and manage their team and do things more efficiently that way. And then again, if we do it the right way and we actually care about the process and we involve people, then all of a sudden we're going to add these efficiencies that make someone's job better. And then we go back and we think through how we're going to impact all of those people and then how we're going to create that why statement that gives every one of them something to attach to. And we set that vision in a way that allows everybody to feel like there is a benefit for the massive amount of work that they're going to have to put forward to make this transformation a reality.
Mhm.
And that's so like that vision piece is sometimes missing and is not often thought through to the level that it needs to be able to get somebody to attach to it. And the communication breaks down through that process. So maybe the vision is set the right way, but then when it gets to that next level, they're not doing a nice job of like helping everybody on their team and understand exactly what that's going to look like. And for it to be impactful for an individual person, you have to help them understand exactly what is going to get better, not just like this mysterious, like, it will be better. Like, that's not going to do anything for anybody because we've all been burned by seeing projects that don't actually work. You have to
Mhm.
get specific about exactly how things are going to improve and what they're going to get. So I think that like setting that vision, and that's one spot that if it's done well, it's like magic. And if it's not done well, that's when you start to see some of the cracks of the stuff that we've talked about from like a user adoption perspective. I would say the other big thing that is one of my hills, because I think there's multiple hills that I would go down swinging on. But one of them is the importance of digital literacy at every single one of those stakeholder groups or personas that you are talking about. Because if you don't have the right understanding of technology and the way that it works, it starts to cause people problems. So again, technology is not the most important piece, but it is important. And it's what actually drives all of these transformations forward because it's the enabler. But what happens is if you don't spend the time educating your executives, all of your management, and everybody that's interacting with that technology about the art of the possible and what all these technologies that you're bringing in are going to do for them, what starts to happen is at the top, we don't know how to set expectations to be successful. We're either setting absolutely unrealistic expectations for a timeline or a budget. So we're running over budget, we're running over timeline, we're pushing back stuff. People are starting to get skeptical that anything's actually going to happen. Or we're setting expectations that are so low because we don't understand and we think it's witchcraft and wizardry that like we don't set the right expectations to actually get anything to happen. Or you burn people out because you're in that scenario where you're running so fast or you don't have the right skill sets to actually make it happen. So the digital literacy at that leadership perspective is so important from that side. And then again, anybody that's impacted by the technology, if they don't understand it, they're gonna be nervous about it. And I think we've reached a point where most people realize that like their job isn't going to just like disappear like this because of AI or whatever else. I'm starting to see a bit of a sentiment change where like same thing that happened with a calculator, people realized it wasn't quite as like devastating to the human population. Like any sort of new technology we get used to and we start moving in the right direction with. And recognizing the value that it plays, but there's still all of these headlines that will tell you about the 400,000 jobs that are going to disappear overnight because of AI. Or, you know, people will, it doesn't matter if it's rational or not. If they don't understand it, they'll start to have this fear that their value is going away by starting to learn something new and interact with technology different. But if you empower all of those people with actual understanding of what the technology can do and how they get to interact with it and be effective with it moving forward, this whole new like paradigm unlocks and they start to help you be more effective with the transformation, come up with new ideas of where it can go. And then your team at the top level is able to set the right expectations so that you're not delaying or going over budget or having things that start to make people question if it's actually ever going to happen.
Absolutely. And there's so much there that I want to unpack. I think for the sake of being able to cover more topics, I won't go super deep, but just one thing that you said that stuck with me is kind of that idea of like aligning the vision to the what's in it for me, and like at every step of the chain, like making sure that we're in sync here. And I think one of the things that we see is, or one of the questions that I hear a lot, and I've even asked it myself at previous companies that I've been in, is like, how does, I think that the most important to people is what's in it for me, but even a simpler like, how am I creating value for the business is a question that like a lot of people can't answer. So they see these at the highest level, either OKRs or KPIs, whatever sort of framework the company's using. It might even just be statements, and depending on how mature they are, maybe they don't even have OKRs or KPIs, but they're like, okay, well, how am I in this particular role driving this initiative? And for some core services, like it's more obvious. Like if you're in sales, of course, you're contributing to the revenue number. But like if you're in IT, or if you're in like marketing, or if you're in like finance, like internal finance, like how am I impacting this? So I think being able to line that up and giving people like a place of belonging, like a sense of unified goal, is important. And then of course, like their lives need to be better, like you said. Like
Well, and to that avenue, the what's in it for me doesn't have to be incredibly self-serving. So, and beliefs on this aside, I had a conversation with a leader a couple of months ago when they were having a return to office like movement and kind of like working through communicating that with their team. And she said that she had some people that were like really resistant to coming in, and they had a very lenient hybrid policy. I think they needed to be in 2 days a month. So it was nothing like, they were being very reasonable with their return, but she still had some resistance from people. And she was working through having conversations with all of her team. And truthfully, the what's in it for me statement, it was a claims leader. And she was saying, what's in it for you is that, like, if you come into the office and you work back in this office environment and we're able to help train and actually retain some of the new people that we're bringing into the department through that camaraderie that comes with working in a department together, through the active listening that can happen when we're all in a room, and like just even being able to ask you questions and interact with you in person versus like having to wait for scheduled time, that helps them up their skills. And then all of a sudden, you're not the only one that has to take on all of the hardest work. So it's like a non-technology example. And that's not necessarily a what's in it for me. Like, they still probably aren't overly happy about or like coming back into the office if they're remote and we're resisting that change, but they at least understand like how, to your point, how it's impacting the business, where there's going to be benefit for them down the road, and like the ultimate business driver behind it. And she said once she put it into that perspective, for a lot of people, they were like, okay, I'm still not happy about it, but I'll do it. Because they at least understood the why behind it.
Exactly. And sometimes you're never gonna beat the core concern, right? But if you can make it better or make it even a little bit more appetizing, I feel like that's important for effectuating the change.
Yeah.
Okay, I will take the time because I just wanted to one other thought popped in my head. So I think for a long time we've heard businesses at odds with IT, and there's varying degrees of truth to this, but I think that there's a third player that's really relevant here, given the topic we're talking about in digital transformation, and you were mentioning process, and that's centers of excellence within a team. There's a couple so there are process experts. I'm thinking like Six Sigma black belts, process excellence professionals, and they can sit in a number of different places in an organization. They can be part of a line of business team in kind of a federated model, or they can sit in a centralized team in like a center of excellence type approach. And I know that a lot of improvement initiatives kind of they're the genesis for the formation of these COEs if they don't already exist. But I think that's kind of like a third player in the mix now, like not just business or IT. I'd actually consider like the process professionals kind of and the COE their own unit, because they don't quite have the domain expertise of the line of business teams because they're not a part of that team. They don't intimately understand financial processes or sales processes or whatever it is. And they don't intimately understand the technology, but they do bring these things together to effectuate the change, right? So they're looking at, when they're working with a line of business, to get them to actually change and improve, they're asking the same type of questions, like what's in it for them? Like, how can I get you on board to make this change? And those kind of things. So I just think, I don't even know if there's necessarily like a deeper point to discuss, but just like something I've noticed as we've been looking at the different groups of people involved with this change is like, not that they weren't there, because there's always been process improvement people, but I think particularly with the advent of technology and where these centers of excellence are using things like process mining or like automation or like process modeling or BPM, or kind of the tool set that they've used and the way that they approach the business has changed a little bit as a result of the technology that they're using. And so I think actually it's a great segue, right? Because I'm saying that this team is really process focused, and that's the second point of the people, process, and technology. You were talking about the importance of rethinking the process. Don't make the dinosaur faster, but like actually like, how do we improve the process? How do we make it better for everyone, deliver better value? So maybe talk to that a little bit, like in terms of changing process within an organization as part of these transformation initiatives. Like, what do you see?
So when I first started selling technology, I worked for a process automation company or a process consulting company that resold technology. And when I say it spoiled me, I didn't realize how much it spoiled me that we always started with process. That was just like that was how I was bred in this industry, was to think about process first. And I didn't realize until I started to create content online and start interacting with other people and talking to people about their experiences, and then also moving on from that role to go more onto the software side. And we can talk more about kind of some of the other challenges that come when you're working with third-party implementers as opposed to like your team being the implementation hand. And there's a lot of dynamics that come to how you implement technology, and it all starts with how you think through the process on the front end. And again, when I first stepped into the role, everybody always talks about the like, this is how we've always done it. And I kind of thought that that was like a little bit of an over exaggeration until I started sitting in on some of these process engagements with our consultants and listening to the conversations, and like how simply like being like, okay, talk me through your current state process. And then like, oh, okay, that's an interesting step. Can you help me understand why you do that? The amount of times, and I was not in every one of those process discussions, I was not involved in all of them, but like the amount of times that I heard people be like, oh, well, I don't know, that's just like how we've always done it. Or like, asking, or people getting into like actually getting new technology and starting and being like, well, why isn't this step there? Being like, can you help me understand why we need this step? And how much we default to like our routine and our habits, and um like not actually taking the time to like think through, like if I were building this in this moment from scratch without any of that mindset that I used to have, how would I solve this problem? Is a very difficult thing for people to do when they're so close to how things have always been done. And so there is intense value, whether it's somebody in a COE or black belt that you've got internally or an external consultant, to come in and help ask those questions. And I always say like the best consultants are kind of like Jedis, where they can like sit down and have a conversation with you. And by the end of it, you think that you've completely designed this new process when they've just been like slowly extracting it from you the entire time. But like when they can do these mind tricks to like help you get past your mental blocks that you have and thinking through how you would design a process if you didn't have a legacy process in mind, is a really fascinating and interesting part to watch happen. But if you don't take that step, you just end up kind of recreating, and then 30 years from now, someone's going to ask the same question and someone's going to respond the exact same way. And realistically, when you start digging beyond that, like, this is how we've always done it, it typically comes back to some sort of limitation that was present with technology in the past. So again, like we've talked about these different waves. Well, when you're building software from scratch and functionality isn't there, and you've got a huge backlog and your developers aren't going to get to it, you figure out a way to make your process work so that you can do your job. And if the technology wasn't developed in a way that allowed you to solve that problem at that point, and you make a workaround, people don't realize that the technology was the reason that you weren't doing it that way in the first place. It just becomes institutionalized. And so when you start to look at like that process, that's, here I am making all of my loops back to that idea of digital literacy. If you don't understand how technology will enable you to do it differently, and what type of new horizons you can take on while you're actually like using modern technology, then you're going to keep defaulting to that old process. So all of these things are incredibly dependent on one another, but that digital literacy piece at least allows you to start thinking through things differently and deciding exactly what that future state process would look like if you had a full blank slate.
So Emma, I'm sure there's at least one black belt in the audience. They mentioned that a comment earlier was spot on, so I'm sure that they love to hear your take there. So
That
thank you for
they're Jedi, that they're Jedi
that,
doing mind
that,
tricks, because I
that
truly
they're a
believe
Jedi doing mind tricks.
it.
Exactly. I love it. Um, maybe just checking the time here. I think maybe I'll make one comment and then we jump to technology to keep it moving. So one of the things that is interesting about process to me is that really intertwines with the people point is that yes, there are processes that are specific to one team, that are uniquely managed by like a department, but there are lots of processes that actually span multiple departments, right? Like the higher level processes, and there's different like hierarchies and different ways that you can conceptualize these different taxonomies that you can use. But one of the things that, like, I guess isn't obvious if you're not at that higher level is you want to understand how you're impacting the adjacent teams that you kind of have to work with. So let's say you have a process that like the output of that process is like you're good, like you need to I don't know, like prep a marketing asset, right? Okay, I'm in marketing. I need to make an asset for the sales team, right? Let's say I get super productive and like hyper efficient and I just start like cranking out assets. Like I'm cranking out like 2 a day, right? The sales team can't handle that. Like there needs to be like some enablement. Like, what are we saying? What is this asset for? How do I use it? Like, and so even though there was this efficiency here, like we're kind of kicking a bottleneck in some way down the line because we're not paying attention to our partners. And I mean, marketing and sales, like we need to work together, right? Like we need to be good, strong partners. And so even though I might be getting a win, like I'm actually like making them angry with me, right? Like if that's happening, that this isn't the case. I'm not hyper efficient. I don't create 2 assets a day. But I'm saying as an example, I think one of the things that we're missing when we're looking at processes is asking ourselves the questions like, what is the bigger impact of this, not just to like the business objectives or our internal objectives, but to the teams upstream and downstream of me? Like, are we going to be causing a problem for someone else and become like get ourselves in the crosshair? And I think, thinking about these COE teams that kind of look across different business units and serve different business units, I think that they have more of an ability to look at those processes at that higher level and juxtapose those and make some of those determinations. So
one thing I want to just quickly add to that is if you're looking at the why and the larger vision, that's really the role of like that leadership, is to figure out again how that's going to impact all of those different departments and how they need to work collectively and set up structures so that people can actually, whether it's the COE or whoever, can actually have those types of discussions to break down those silos, because otherwise it gets really easy to fall into, even within a department, I'm making myself more efficient. I've figured out this hack. I'm going to do this. But then like my manager who needs to approve everything now has a backlog because all 5 of us figured out something and we didn't think through how someone else interacts with it. So that's again, like part of that visioning and like helping kind of set the stage for everybody, is thinking through how all of those connect and helping everybody on your team actually understand how all of those individual what's in it for me is at a department level link together to make that higher vision actually come to fruition.
I actually, if we have the time to get to it, I did want to show our product a little bit, just in the context of one of these examples. The example for process simulation is actually exactly that in the context of claims. So the claims analysts earlier in the process, let's say we hire 2 more of them, so that they can basically do their part of the claims process. We have more resources to do that part of the claims process. So now suddenly that's faster. That was the bottleneck that was leading us to not be able to process these claims as fast as we need. But guess what? Now the supervisor that's dealing with ultimately approving or denying the claims and also has to deal with the appeals is now backlogged because like they're just getting too many claims now. And like, really, we needed another supervisor to handle this case. And so I'll talk about it if we get to that example, but like the boiling up and like sending too much, and I'm totally with you here. And this is something we see, like, we're doing it. It's a demo environment, obviously, but this is something that we have seen in practice when working with customers, like these types of things all the time.
Well, even things like RPA, when you all of a sudden automate a little tiny part of something and it's running at the speed that technology can run at, but there's people on the other side of it. Oftentimes we don't think through that, or you're running something and then all of a sudden you cause a problem because you're hitting up against an external website too much that you've like created like there's all these different things that like unless you spend the time to truly map out that process and do something where you can simulate how that's going to take place, you don't recognize what that's going to have the impact of. And it's better to figure that out during the planning phase when you're thinking through things than it is when you have an oh shit moment
Yep.
after you've gone live with something.
Yes, absolutely. And there's something to be said about, I think that there was a change like, oh, waterfall bad, agile good. You still need to do a little bit of planning to understand where you're going to get. You don't want to hit that point and not be aware of it.
Next, we're
Um,
already running up on time. Are you sure you want to get me started on my agile rants?
yeah,
Because we
let's let's
might lose
let's
all of our time then.
yeah, let's not do that. Although I would love to talk about it, honestly, like I could let let's maybe book another 30 minutes to do
Yeah,
that at some point.
there we go.
So let's actually transition because you mentioned RPA and like let's talk about technology a little bit.
Mhm.
And I mean we have to talk about Gen AI when we're here. And maybe I'll get my point of view first. I actually think that the wave of Gen AI is not that different in practice than what we saw with automation. So automation's everywhere now, but I would say it's really like had its heyday in the last 5 years with RPA becoming more mainstream. But what we're seeing is not only the point that you're making, like we didn't see the downstream impacts for like people getting overloaded by this coming through. We actually were just kind of automating everything without being aware of how healthy the process was to begin with. And so automation makes processes faster. But if the process is broken, you're throwing gasoline on a fire. You're just accentuating this problem. So, I've worked with a number of finance teams, and nobody ever believes this at first. But then when you do the analysis and show them, they do. There's companies out there are paying invoices twice.
Mhm.
And it's not obvious. Sometimes it's because it's slightly different. The ID on the invoice is not the same, but it was two different business units that they're working with that build them the same thing, and they're paying these twice. Well, if you get an RPA bot that is paying those invoices as soon as they come in to help out the clerks that would be doing this, now you're paying duplicate invoices faster. Like that's not a good thing. That's not a good business outcome. And so I think with Gen AI right now, people are trying to see where it sticks, right? And there's kind of the personal use, like ChatGPT. Everybody's using it to write emails or generate content or whatever it is, right? But there's also the more corporate aspect of it. Like how are they using or enabling Gen AI type services for their customers? So like when you go into submit a claim, we've always had chatbots, but like, can we use Gen AI to make that process more efficient? Or can we use this in the call centers to be more efficient? And I think that we're going to run into the same problems, and let's not make the same mistake that we made with automation, as an industry. Let's actually analyze what's going on in the process, try to understand where the bottlenecks are, try to understand where the inefficiencies exist, close some of those gaps if we need to before deploying the technology, or if the technology is the thing that's closing that gap, let's be very conscious of that. And let's do a little bit of like simulation or prediction work to understand like what's the expected ROI on this. So instead of just throwing this everywhere and seeing what sticks, let's actually prioritize what's going to give us the best bang for the buck. And I mean, I'm not here to naysay AI. I think like the hype is warranted, right? This is going to revolutionize the way that industry works. But let's be smart about how we roll it out and not just kind of jump in right away and throw it everywhere. And I think as far as
I think you're
technology
being
goes,
too
that's
kind, Max,
mhm.
in believing that a lot of people are implementing it where they even know that there would be an ROI. I think right now the state that we're in with generative AI is actually more focused on a sense of urgency that's been portrayed of like you need to be using AI right now or your business will be out of business in 2 days time. And it's making that random acts of technology just like get a dose of steroids and start going crazy because we're not focused on where we're actually seeing a need for it. We're focused on the idea of using it. And to your point, if you just slow down for a half a second and take a deep breath and think through where you have actual problems in your business and rethink the way that you would like to design that process, sometimes the answer is going to be AI. Sometimes the answer is not going to be AI. Sometimes it's going to be a different type of technology. Sometimes it's going to be no technology at all and just simply updating your process. But I think we have collectively, as a society at this point, fallen in love with the solution of AI and forgotten that we're supposed to fall in love with the problems. And I think if we can, yeah, if we can focus on where we have actual problems, think through the process, and then do something like simulating what different types of technology can do to that process and which one is going to be the most effective in solving that problem. And the outcomes will be far and away better than just thinking that if we put AI at it, it's gonna, and then we could go into the conversations of like what AI actually is and whether people like fully conceptualize like what people are telling them is AI in their tools versus like what is actually other technology that they've just like slapped the AI label onto. And because of that urgency, we're seeing that like random acts of technology just take off, and it's not going to give us the outcomes that we're looking for. And people that aren't doing this thoughtful implementation of it are going to get burned. And there's already been like countless examples of this, but like the one that I go back to all the time is there was an airline that had a Gen AI chatbot enabled on their website, and it was trained on a lot of different scenarios, but the LLM was not trained on their bereavement policy. And somebody chatted with this chatbot and asked it what their bereavement policy was, and it didn't know, so it hallucinated and it made one up. And it told the customer the wrong thing. And it told the customer that their ticket would just like be reimbursed or something along those lines. And when the customer went to like make do on the promise that the chatbot had given them, a person was like, oh, no, 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 I'm sorry, that's not our policy. Well, guess what? The airline was sued and lost a lot of money because they didn't think through what putting an experimental technology in front of a customer would potentially do from like a liability standpoint for them. So when you lose track of like, maybe you put that bot in front of a actual person. Maybe you use that to train a person internally. Maybe you use that as a knowledge source, but you don't put it in front of the customer. But if you're not thinking through the problem, the problem too much call volume? Is it that your team doesn't know that? Like, what was the problem that they were trying to solve? Was it just eliminating people? Well, guess what? You learn the lesson of what happens there. So I think that that's like the biggest thing is we need to get back to actually falling in love with the problem.
Mhm. I love that. Having worked in product management and product marketing my entire career, like falling in love with the problem is such a great way to just package the essence of what we do in one statement. Okay, so we have about 12 minutes until the top of the hour. I see that there's some Q&A. So I think I did have some slides. I don't think I'm going to throw the show the
Okay.
This conversation has been great. I do want to pull up the product and show a demo to talk about a use case and claims given your experience. But let's see, maybe before we jump into that, if there's any questions in here that from the audience. And again, for anybody in the audience that hasn't asked a question, if you do have one, please put it in the Q&A box. We'll try to answer it. One here. What are the 3 to 4 main levels of iGrafx implementation when implementing in the middle of a financial evolution strategy, changing 77 financial systems, mostly out of the box solutions? Okay. Yeah. And then there was an additional follow-up. So let me know if I get this wrong, because I might have misunderstood the question. But actually, you know what? I said I wasn't going to show slides, but this will probably answer the question better, or at least we'll have a visual to accompany the answer. Okay. There we go. And Emma, can you just confirm for me that you can actually see the slides?
Yep, we're good to go.
Okay. So as you look at any of the any transformation project or evolution project, whether or not it's financial, as you're looking to improve the business processes, there's kind of 3 steps that that we see companies following generally. You might call these something different, but in theory, these are the three pieces: discover, design, and optimize. So discover is really getting objective visibility into what's happening today. So you can understand what are the bottlenecks, the inefficiencies, what's going wrong so you can improve it. Then in design, you say, what does that future state look like? It's important that this is collaborative. To Emma's point earlier, getting the right people in the room, making sure that one, everybody's aligned on what the goal is at the end of the day, linking this to some characteristics of the business, but also how is this improving their lives in some way or another. This is also where you can run some simulations to and I say that from a technical standpoint, like we offer a process simulation technology, but there are other ways that you could predict what the impact would be. So you want to understand if you're improving this process in one way or another, whether that's a hiring decision, whether that's implementing technology, whether that's reorganizing people, whether it's re-engineering the process and getting rid of steps or adding steps, what's going to be the impact of making that change? When you and also compliance, we didn't touch on that too much, but especially in insurance, like this is a topical issue, right? We want to make sure that we're optimizing the processes in a way that, and the person who asked the question was asking about banking, also highly regulated. The changes that we're making to improve the process for performance reasons aren't actually exposing us to undue risk from a regulatory perspective. So we figure out what's wrong, we propose some changes, we see what impact they're going to have, we have that future state, we get to work on implementing it, and then over time we also optimize this. So we continue to understand what's changing with the process, what new challenges come up, we're safeguarding against future inefficiencies. And so this discover, design, optimize process is iterative. So even if you have those 77 processes that the audience member asked about, like this is the process we kind of go through for each one of those. Now those are supported by different pieces of technology, and I'm not going to jump into this, but some very common ones: process mining to help understand what's going on today. You can understand the processes from data that exists in your system. With design, you would use BPM or BPM. Again, the person in the audience talked about BPMN 2.0. Great way to standardize the processes in a well-accepted modeling notation. And then on the optimize end, again, you could apply automation, Gen AI integration. But I think the important point here, maybe the most important piece out of all of this, and to Emma, what you were speaking about earlier, is we don't want random acts of technology. We don't want these different pieces operating in a vacuum or tackling a specific smaller problem. And so when you're thinking about that financial evolution strategy that the person asked about, like that needs to be captured somewhere. And that needs to be related to all of the information that we're getting from these different pieces. And so with iGrafx, we provide a process repository that allows you to capture all the metadata about your business. So what are the strategies, the goals, the KPIs that you're using to measure them, the systems in play, the personnel in play, the risks that you're exposed to, and their mitigating controls. So all of that information is brought together and contextualized in terms of the process so that people know, you know, what is my role in this process? How does it impact the business? What's the benefit to me? How do I do my job? What are the risks that I need to be aware of as I'm performing this action? So bringing it all together is really important to enable this change that Emma had been discussing. And one more thing, like, again, I said, we won't go deep in technology. I won't plug iGrafx too much here. But if you are looking for a software solution to help with your digital transformation initiative, I work for iGrafx. Don't take my word for it. Don't take any vendor's word for it. Like, we'd love to have a conversation. You should make sure that the solution works for you, that it's delivering value, that it meets your specific needs, but also just do some research. There are plenty of analysts that review the space. There are plenty of online reviews. So just make sure, you know, don't take anyone's word for it. Don't take my word for it. Like, look around. So that was it for the slides. Let me jump back to the questions, and it looks like a couple more came in. We will send out the recording afterwards. The person who asked the question, their internal network went out, so I'm sorry to hear that. It looks like there's some technical issues, and I'm not sure if future state, level 2, level 3. I think it's probably too much for this conversation right now, because some organizations standardize on their process taxonomies. They might use something like APQC, but different organizations have different taxonomies. So to get into what's level 2, level 3, where do you start is at a detail level is probably tricky, but I would say that you need both the top and the bottom generally. You need to know what are the objectives, what's the organization working towards, what are the key value drivers, and you need to understand how are people doing their day-to-day work, how can that be improved, and how can that align to that business value. And I talked a lot there. We have 5 minutes left. I do want to pull up this demo and just like show this, because I think it really kind of codifies a lot of what we were just talking about, Emma. All right. And just one more time, can you verify for me that you can see the screen?
We're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you. So at least the black belt in the audience, I think, is going to be familiar with this, but any other process professionals that have done BPMN modeling probably recognize this as well. So for those of you that aren't aware, this is a BPMN diagram, and this is basically a workflow that shows the entire claims process, all the different teams involved, the steps they're involved with, and it can be somewhat complicated, right? There are easy processes. If we were making a pizza at Domino's, it'd probably be fewer steps. In fact, their app shows that it's fewer steps, but it can be a bit more complicated. But like we've been saying, we need to relate this to the parts of the business that it matters to. So who are the people involved with this? Like, what's the RACI matrix look like? What are the different systems that we're using to effectuate this process? What are the goals we're driving to? How are they measured? What are the regulatory requirements? So for instance, like the right to appeal varies state by state, how long an insurance company would have to react to an incoming claim, things of that nature. So we have the process, we know how it sits, we can get data for that process by using process mining. Of course, again, sign me out here, which will give us information about how this process actually operates today. So you can see things like, how long is it taking on average for a specific step? How long is it between steps? If we look at a specific step, what's the probability that after this step, the process goes one way or another? So we get all this rich information to make this process live and breathe. We can use that information to then run simulations about the future as we're testing changes, so we don't need to make investments up front. But the point was, to the example earlier, Emma, in the claim validation step, we found out that our claims analyst couldn't handle the workload. He was getting backed up. So we said, what happens if we hire 2 more claims analysts? We did that. This bottleneck got removed. But what we saw is now there was a backup in this work that the claim supervisor was doing, because there was more claims coming through that they had to approve or deny, couldn't spend as much time on the appeals, put us at regulatory risk because we weren't following the right to appeal statutes of the state that we were in. But we can understand all this before making changes, right? And that's the power of contextualizing this against the business goals, understanding how it actually operates through mining, and then predicting what the future looks like with simulation. So that's enough of me talking about the product. Sorry, that was kind of rushed. I just saw that we were coming up on time there. Let's see what we got in the chat box, because I see a bunch coming in. And I don't know if someone asked, would you link somehow graph and process mining together? Yes. So that process model, I didn't show it, but it supports process metrics. So you can use that data from process mining overlaid on that, so you can see those various metrics. It's also in the configuration of the simulation parameters, like things like decision probabilities for the different steps. So yes, you can link them. Can you leverage iGrafx as, let me see if there's a question that is for not just iGrafx. I'd love to answer them, but while we have you, Emma.
I was gonna say, Max, for anybody that wants to learn more, once the recording goes out, respond to that message and ask the team for a demo where you can talk through some of your more specific questions, actually dive deep into all of the things as it pertains to you and your situation. I think is probably the best path for any of you guys that are asking more in-depth stuff.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. On our website, iGrafx.com, top right, very easy. You can book a demo. We'll walk you through the product and not just show off the product, but have a conversation about what your needs are, what value you're trying to drive, and how we might be able to help if we do want to have a further discussion. I love the comments. It's not so many questions. It's just like a lot of comments and excitement, and I love to see that as a host. But we are at time here. So Emma, I don't know if you had any closing remarks that you wanted to make before we hopped off.
No, certainly if anybody's got any questions, you can find me with my name on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me, and I can also help get you connected with Max and the rest of the iGrafx team if there's anything I can do to help. But thank you for the opportunity to join you. This is one of my favorite things to chat about, so great way to start the morning.
Emma, it's been a pleasure having you. I absolutely love the conversation, and I hope that we can do this again in the future, honestly. Like maybe we'll unpack that agile topic in the next one.
There we go.
But thank you for being here, and thank you to our audience members for attending. We really appreciate it. Again, we will send out a recording in the email if you had to drop out for whatever reason. But enjoy the rest of your day and your weeks, everyone. Have a good one.